Hey everyone, Sam here, otherwise known as FPL Pricey. In today's video, I'm going to run you through all of the key transfer tips to help you get set up for game week 10. In the meantime, if you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel, that'd be greatly appreciated. For now though, let's crack on with it. So let's start off by talking about a player who has very much been in form since the start of this season, and even arguably last season was getting a little bit overlooked, and that is of course Chris Wood. 2 goals in game week 9, and that brings him into even sharper focus than perhaps before, and has West Ham next up at home. So again, there are probably points to be gotten at in the next couple of game weeks. Chris Wood obviously is going to be top of the list for a lot of managers, but I don't think he's necessarily the only forward pick that I would recommend at this point in time. There are quite a few others that we'll reflect on later on in this video, so do watch out for those. But of course, there are also a number of cheaper forwards who just aren't performing at the moment. So I think looking at that third striker spot makes a lot of sense. Perhaps even in some cases, the second striker spot, maybe that £7 to £8 million forward, could be even downgraded to someone like Chris Wood, 6.4, probably 6.5 million later on in the week, but that could save you a decent amount of money. Now, with Chris Wood in focus, I just wanted to take a quick look at his stats and compare them to the goal tally he's gotten so far. So 7 goals in 9 game weeks, obviously absolutely fantastic. And the way that Nottingham Forest are setting up very much favours pretty much everything is running through him centrally at the moment. There's not much happening anywhere else. They're very efficient with the ball. It's all chances that are going towards Chris Wood. So I think this scoring streak will continue, but whether or not it continues at the same trajectory that we're seeing so far is definitely up for debate. And looking at the data, like I said, 0.46 XG per 90 is good. It's definitely not a bad number, but he's running a lot hotter and a lot further beyond his expected goal tally so far this season. Now, obviously, that's just a striker in form, and that could continue, but you'd expect on average for him to have scored maybe 4 or 5 goals so far this season based on the data he's gotten. Now, obviously, he's overperformed on that, and he seems to be slotting everything away very, very comfortably. But scoring streaks do come to an end. We saw this with Muniz last season, with Mateta last season. Even players like Dominic Calvert-Lewin in the past have had little patches of form that they then regress back towards their expected data. Chris Wood is a quality striker and he will keep scoring goals. I'm absolutely sure of it. But what we need to look at now is the fixtures to come. And okay, 3 of the next 5 probably aren't that bad. 3 good home games there. West Ham, Newcastle is iffy, but definitely doable. And then Ipswich in game week 13. It's not a bad run, but there are 2 very, very nasty away games in there, Arsenal and Man City. So I don't think he's a priority, you must rip up your teams to buy him kind of player right now. But if you've got a spot in your starting 11 at the moment, maybe a DCL and a few transfers that you can use, then obviously it does make a lot of sense to go for someone like Chris Wood, who is on an insanely hot streak at the moment, and a decent few fixtures to come in the next 4 game weeks. Now then, if you've just watched that Chris Wood section thinking, he wasn't that hot on him, why isn't he that keen? I am keen, but I'm more keen on other strikers at the moment. And the first one on my watch list right now is Yoane Wissa, who has been injured for a little while, but the data prior to injury was absolutely incredible. And he comes back from injury, straight in, 90 minutes, immediately against Ipswich. Obviously, they're not going to have those sort of easy games all season long, but Brentford's fixtures coming are very, very strong for the foreseeable. The next 5 weeks, I would say, is a great timeline to look at maybe bringing in another Brentford attacker. Obviously, Brian Mbeumo is locked into a lot of our sides right now, but if you've got an extra Brentford spot, I really don't mind doubling up, especially with those next 4 fixtures in mind: Fulham, Bournemouth, Everton, Leicester. That's a great run. And Wissa, his goal tally, his returns, as well as the underlying data, has been exceptional for a long time now. And I think the only reason people haven't talked about him more in the last couple of seasons has been because he's basically played foil to Ivan Toney, and he hasn't really ever taken up that central spot on a consistent enough basis to be a really decent pick. when he has played, he's gotten the returns. And now, with this new setup without Ivan Toney and alongside Brian and Burmo, it looks like he's one of the leading men for Brentford. And I do genuinely think that he is going to be as good, if not a better option than Chris Wood over the next 5 game weeks. Obviously, 3 of the next 4 for Wood look decent, but I would say on balance, the Brentford fixtures are ever so slightly better. And there are less of those benchable games in there. So no Man Cities, no Arsenals. You can just play them week in, week out. And crucially, the data, the XG in particular, is almost double that of Chris Wood so far. So very, very decent pickup. He's cheaper than Chris Wood at 5.9 million. And I do think the fixtures are maybe slightly better. So overall, I think I prefer Yoane Wissa. Obviously, the injury is something that we need to monitor, but he played 90 minutes. It seems to be in the past now. And fingers crossed, you've got yourself a very cheap differential pickup with a ton of upside. So yet another cheap differential forward that I really like the look of for the foreseeable is Matheus Cunha. Now, returned obviously got the equaliser in game week 9, but his stats so far this season have been decent. And Wolves, although they've not really picked up the points, are still creating him enough chances to be a decent FPL asset. 4 goals so far in 9 game weeks, that's not bad going. And the data also suggests that he's running at probably an expected return every other game. So I think that's absolutely fine, especially considering the fixtures that Wolves have had so far this season. Some really tough games in there. And we're about to see them embark on a patch of very reasonable fixtures that I think Wolves assets are going to become a lot more within the FPL zeitgeist over the next few weeks. This, I would say, is the first week where it's an obvious jumping on point. Brighton, obviously, in game week 9, some managers went early, would have been rewarded in the case of Matheus Cunha anyway. And I think from this point onwards, 2 home games now against Crystal Palace, who have been struggling, and Southampton, who obviously are down at the bottom of the table too, conceding a lot of chances in central areas, a great jumping on point. Followed by that, Fulham, Bournemouth and Everton. It's a sea of green, and I really like Matheus Cunha. I think he's a quality Premier League operator, by the way, as well. And that's a bit of a subjective point, but I think that he is himself a fantastic player, and Wolves are going to try and play into his strengths wherever at all possible. With these sort of fixtures to come, I think we're about to see a much better version of Wolves over the next few weeks. And despite their positioning in the league, I still think that Matheus Cunha is going to be a good pickup. And at just 0.1 million more than Chris Wood, I definitely think there's an argument to saying, okay, Chris Wood's had the good fixtures. Maybe now Cunha is the next one that we can jump on and hopefully get on a hot streak before it really gets going. And who knows, obviously it could go the other way, but given the fixtures, given the quality of player, and also given the data, I do think Cunha could be about to see a bit of an uptick alongside Wolves in general as well. So another little differential forward to consider in that pack. So let me know which of those 3 forwards that you prefer, Wood, Cunha or Wissa. I think on balance, I just about prefer Yoane Wissa at the moment, but it's a tight call. So let me know in the comments below which one you prefer. Now, of course, we have to talk today about Mo Salah. That's 6 goals in the season now after he got the equaliser against Arsenal on the Sunday afternoon kickoff. 5 assists as well, so that's 11 attacking returns in just 9 game weeks. And the data isn't half bad either, 0.85 XGI per 90. That's very encouraging, as usual, as we expect from one of the best ever FPL assets there has been. Now, the question with Salah that will just keep rumbling on week after week is whether or not he's worth the price when there are other assets in midfield that are also getting very comparable underlying data and returns for 2 million cheaper, that being Saka and Palmer. And I think with all of those players, as I always mention on these videos, it much more depends on the fixtures with Salah now more than ever before. I think in previous seasons, when those other players weren't near enough his price where you could probably have them all without really worrying, Salah was kind of an auto pick. Whereas this season, I think it much more heavily depends on whether or not he's got a good run of fixtures, that he is captainable and he does maybe outweigh some of the other alternatives. Now, Saka and Palmer don't have the nicest couple of games to come in game week 10 and 11, although, of course, they could still get very good points, as we saw from both of them in game week 9. But Mo Salah has unquestionably very good fixtures for the next 3 weeks. Brighton and Villa both at home, followed by Southampton away from home. Not only are those good fixtures, but they're also potentially very good captaincy fixtures as well, or at least in 2 of them. And I think that if you can get to Mo Salah, of course, over a third of the game already have him, so congratulations if you do. But if you're looking at midfielder transfers this week and you have any sort of way of getting to Mo Salah, then of course it makes a lot of sense to do so. Now, one question, and I'm not going to go into Haaland in particular too much in this video, but a big question this week will be whether or not to get rid of Erling Haaland and bring in Mo Salah as part of a double swap, because Haaland's fixtures maybe aren't quite as good as they have been. He's also not been in the greatest of form, of course, although the underlying data against Southampton suggests that he was unlucky not to get a lot more than he did. But the fixtures aren't great. He's got a couple of away games. They're definitely not as nice as Salah's, but it is quite difficult to have both of them in your side, especially if you've already got a Saka or a Palmer in midfield. So is it worth the double swap? Now, I think if it was for a hit, I would probably swerve it. I don't think I'd be selling Haaland for a hit ahead of Bournemouth away from home. Now, even though Salah's got a great fixture against Brighton, I would maybe slightly prefer Salah because it's the home fixture and because Brighton have looked pretty open defensively. But Haaland can easily do well and easily score a couple or a hat-trick against Bournemouth. I don't think anyone would be massively surprised to see that. And I think for a hit, those hits in a single game week just don't pay off often enough for me to want to take that chance. Now, I think the one asterisk there is if it's all part of a swap where, okay, you're downgrading Erling Haaland, but maybe to another striker you're really keen on, to Mo Salah up from someone like, let's say, a Rodgers who got hooked before the 60th minute in game week 9, or a Semenyo, for instance, that could make sense, especially if it's not for a hit. And again, especially if you're much more keen on captaining Salah over the next 3. And that's a decision that definitely has to be weighed up before making this sort of double swap. It's one of those things that could easily blow up in your face. But I do think for free, it makes a lot of sense, especially because the extra money you get out of Erling Haaland means that not only can you have Salah, but you can have an upgrade somewhere else as well. And I think on balance, considering the fixtures coming for Haaland, if I was to wildcard right now, I'd be much more likely to go with a very heavy midfield of Salah, Palmer, Saka, and skip out on Erling Haaland than go with the inverse of that and go Haaland with maybe only one premium midfielder. I think both could work, of course, but I think you can just about get more value for money out of those heavy hitters in midfield. And of course, they're cheaper, so you can have slightly more of them with more depth elsewhere. Now, that's not to say you need to rip up your sides to sell Erling Haaland and buy Mo Salah. Haaland will absolutely still be a good pick. It's just, if you can do it for free, and my logic applies that on a wildcard, I would probably prefer the midfielders and going heavy there, then I think it does make sense. Now, I'm in an opportune position this week where I don't actually need to sell Erling Haaland to get to Salah if I move fairly early, and I'm planning on getting rid of Foden potentially for Salah with one free transfer. Now, if you can have both Haaland and Salah this week, I think that is possibly ideal, considering Palmer and Saka both don't have the greatest couple of game weeks to come. But they can, of course, always hurt. The ownership is high, especially for Palmer. So I am always going to be scared of at least one premium that I just can't get to. That's a slight meta point for this season. You just simply can't own all of these premiums at once. So I think it's better to plan ahead and try and focus on the really nice little fixture patches that some of these premiums have and have a route to get to them when the fixtures turn good. Now, luckily, in this instance, I do have a route to Salah. Some of you out there also might have a really easy route to Salah. But if it's not for a hit, I don't really mind looking at getting rid of Haaland, especially if it gives you extra money to add depth elsewhere. So this will probably be a little bit of a quicker section because we've already talked about the Wolves fixtures, but Rayan Ait-Nouri is another Wolves player that I really like the look of over the next few game weeks. Of course, the fixtures from an attacking point of view are looking really good, but from a defensive point of view as well, you might expect a couple of clean sheets in there too. And for someone at just 4.5 million with the attacking threat that he carries, I think, again, a very good differential enabler to build into your FPL sides. Now, at only 5.3% ownership, this guy has gotten the most attacking returns out of any defender so far this season, including 3 goals, which wouldn't even be bad for a midfielder, let alone a left back. Now, there are a couple of points that I would maybe raise on Rayan Ait-Nouri, not necessarily negative, but mainly to just provide a little bit of balance. Now, the data for a defender is good, but 0.2 XGI per 90 in combination, 3/4 of that being goal threat, of course, is not the sort of data that you'd say, okay, he's going to continue returning with an attacking return every other game week. It's more like 1 in 5. So he is running quite hot at the moment. Again, the fixtures have been poor, and for him to get 5 attacking returns from that set of fixtures is not an easy thing to do. So you might expect the data to also increase over the next few game weeks, and he might get forward a bit more. The other thing to mention with Ait-Nouri, again, not to put anyone off, but he is on 4 yellow cards, so 1 more and he gets the 1-game suspension. Now, I wouldn't let that stop you from going for him, especially if you've got any sort of cover in your defence on your bench at the moment that you could rely on for just 1 game week. So if you've got the likes of a Wout Faes, for instance, on the bench, and you can just bring him on for 1 week, I think the upside of Ait-Nouri could be enough that even if he misses 1 game week, it's probably going to be okay. The one final thing that I wanted to note, again, don't let it put you off, but Gary O'Neill, after the match against Brighton, mentioned that there might be a change of system where we're looking at a back 4 rather than a back 5 for Wolves from now on. Now, that was obviously game state dependent, but he did say he preferred the shape, and there could be a chance that they use that system more often from now on. Now, with Ait-Nouri in mind, there's always a chance that he could line up in an actual left wing position, but I think it's more likely that he goes back to left back if they play a back 4. That could mean that he's a little bit more withdrawn as a role. So again, I still think the data's good enough and the price is definitely good enough for him to be a good pick, but it's just considerations to make. If you don't have much bench cover in defence, he is on 4 yellow cards, so you have to watch out for that. And of course, if they do change the system, then maybe we're not expecting an attacking return every single week like we've been seeing recently. It's more the fixtures are good enough and he is still attacking enough generally, even if he were to play as a more withdrawn left back, to get returns every now and then. Long story short, 4.5 million, you can't really go wrong. And I think by far he's the best 4.5 million out there right now. So one striker who has been incredibly frustrating for the last few weeks now is Dominic Solanke. And yet again, I'm sitting here talking about a player who just simply isn't getting points at the moment. But it's not only that. It's also his cost. 7.7 is not cheap for a forward, especially when some of the players that I've already mentioned in this video are performing at cheaper prices. But the data week on week is regressing as well, which is especially alarming considering the fixtures that Spurs have had. So in the last 3 games, he hasn't achieved an XG of 0.1 in any single one of those games yet. So the chances have really, really dried up. Now, earlier on in the season, we have seen games where he's gotten 4 big chances in one game, over 1 XG in a couple of games as well. So it is very much feast or famine, but I think we're now at the point where it seems quite likely that Spurs just aren't able to get him on the end of chances as much as maybe they were at the start of the season. Now, the reason behind that could be literally anything at this point, and I'm not a football analytics genius, so it's hard to determine exactly what it is that's going wrong that means that he's simply just not receiving the ball in the box in those goal scoring areas, but it just isn't happening for him at the moment. Now, the performances on the pitch haven't been the worst, especially in game week 9. He was probably one of the only Spurs players who did have a decent game, you would say. But again, barely any chances, no XG to speak of. And when you've got a striker costing that much money, who's not getting the chances, he's very, very difficult to hold on to in FPL. I suppose it's just a matter of how long you're willing to give him before you give up hope. Now, he's only 13% owned, so it's not like everyone has this problem to deal with. But those of you who do own him, including myself, by the way, have a really tough decision to make around about now, because the next 2 games both home fixtures. Okay, Villa are a very good side, of course, but they do give up chances. And then Ipswich have looked like one of the poorest defences in the league so far this season. So it's whether or not you back the fixtures, or it's just an eye test thing and a data thing where the player himself just isn't doing what he needs to be worth 7.7 million in your team. I think for now, because I've only got one free transfer and I've got other issues to sort, he's a player that I will reluctantly hold on to because of those two fixtures. But again, fixtures don't always bring form, and we've seen this already in the last 3 weeks. Solanke with decent fixtures hasn't performed, so I am incredibly worried about him at the moment, and I'm kind of just crossing my fingers and hoping that one of those feast games that I was talking about, where he does get a lot of big chances, falls in the next two, when maybe quite a few managers have jumped off of him, and it'll be a nice differential. That being said, though, I am worried if I had more than one free transfer and less issues to deal with, I'd probably be looking at alternatives to Solanke at a cheaper price, who, of course, I've already discussed in this video. So just a quick injury roundup before we wrap up today's video, and none of these players, I would say, are definite sells ahead of game week 10 just yet, but it's more to keep an eye on throughout the week to see how things develop and to listen out for any press conference notes on these four players. Now, Gabriel went off in the second half against Liverpool. He didn't look like he was moving too badly even as he walked down the tunnel, but he did have an ice pack on the bench after he went off and came back from the changing room, you'd assume. So that will be a doubt ahead of game week 10 unless we see him in full training and the photos come out of him in training with Arsenal. Arsenal historically are very good at hiding their injured players or non-injured players in the training photos to kind of throw their opposition off the scent, and it's definitely something that they're consciously trying to do this season. So don't expect any miracles in terms of we'll see a big Gabriel picture coming out on the Arsenal Twitter account later on this week. I just don't think we're going to get that. So Gabriel is going to be an issue, I think. I'm personally currently planning on holding him for now, probably even starting him, because I've got one defender on my bench that I can rely on to come on if he is still out. I think unless we hear definitive news that he is definitely out, not just of game week 10, but also probably a longer term injury, then of course he is a sell in that case. But unless we do, I think I'm probably going to hold on to him because I still believe that Arsenal defence over a longer period of time is going to pay off. Now, obviously, it's been painful for the last few weeks since I went for them on the game week 6 wildcard. No clean sheets since then, but I still believe that they are a good defence and they will turn the corner when the fixtures turn as well. Now, Son, again, was a doubt going into game week 9, Obviously didn't play, but wasn't too far off. It sounds like he should be back pretty soon. So I would be surprised if he's not fit for game week 10 and is also usually fairly open. So I don't think that's too much of a doubt if you currently have Son. Diogo Jota, I think, again, we're going to have to wait to hear more. There's no real diagnosis on how long that's going to be. Obviously, he missed the game against Arsenal, but do watch out. I think he's only 5% owned, so not too many of you will be impacted, I'm sure. But if you do have him, just keep an eye on the press conference notes. Again, Arne Slot is fairly open about these things, it seems to be so far, so maybe we'll get word on him. Now, finally, I've talked about Chris Wood in this video, but it is worth noting that he went off around 80 minutes, I think it was, in game week 9, obviously after a great performance. But he is down on the FPL website with a flag, and that's a 75% chance of playing with a knock at the moment. I would be surprised if he doesn't recover in time for game week 10. But again, as long as he's flagged and as long as he's a doubt, it's definitely one to just monitor through the week. Just make sure that there's a training photo of him, or maybe Nuno says something in a press conference that gives the affirmative that he is an okay player to be using this game week. Obviously, if you've got him, you absolutely hold him unless he's completely ruled out. I really doubt that's going to be the case. But again, if you're thinking of buying him this week, just one to monitor before you go and take the plunge. So as we wrap up today's video, please do remember to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed the content. And as always, leave a comment below if there are any players that you'd like me to discuss more, and I'll have a chat with you in the comments. In the meantime, good luck ahead of game week 10, and I'll see you later on this week as we start preparing for team selection ahead of the deadline.